Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 316 of the 21st Century Work Life podcast. Today we've got a What's Going On episode, which is these episodes where Maya Middlemiss and myself look at, exactly what's going on in the world of online collaboration, remote work. And in fact, we're trying to look at also society, because let's remember that the world of work does not exist in a bubble. Sometimes we wish it did. So listeners, virtualnotdistant.com if you want anything from us. But let me welcome today's co-host, Maya. Hello.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everyone. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting episode. And you're so right that the whole thing about remote work is it brings remote work out into the world in a way that didn't happen before when we're all sat in offices.
Yes, exactly. So I'm going to ask that you lead in this first part. So listeners, we've got a couple, we're going to look specifically at one aspect of the world at the moment. And then we've got a couple of tech pieces that we want to touch, and then some stuff from the community. But we'll focus on this, which is we touched a little bit in the podcast maybe 1 or 2 years ago when there was I was invited to a conference with lots of young people where education featured heavily. But Maya, you are currently having an experience around online school. So you thought that it was an interesting topic to bring to the table, and I couldn't agree more. How's it going, and what is it? Explain what is it first? What is it that you're going through?
Yeah, this is we're having a little bit of a flashback to 2020 right now in our house, because we are now completely remote working and studying household. Sort of dawned on me fairly recently, because we have 2 parents working from home and we have 2 daughters studying from home.
Wow.
The eldest has been studying with the Open University for a couple of years now, which is going great. And she started that obviously during the pandemic, and it was one of those life transitions where going off to university in the normal way was being very badly affected, and we knew that she'd probably end up studying online anyway. So that was the case of, well, then you might as well go somewhere where they know how to do that properly, because the Open University had been teaching online at that level for, I don't know, about 40 years or something. So
yeah, when it was called distance learning.
Yes, and it was on BBC Two in the middle of the night. And
like my friend Philip used to have like all these bits of paper and books and stuff sent to his home.
Yes, that's what I did my DMS with the OU in the at the very end of the last century, and it was they had an embryonic forum type Usenet-y thing, but it wasn't for teaching. That was more a kind of social layer, and everything came in big boxes.
Wow.
And you shipped your essay off by recorded post to your tutor, and so it's changed a bit since then. And then the other transition that happened to us more recently is my younger daughter is now doing her GCSEs with online schooling as well, because for lots of complicated reasons, including the fact that we're a British family living in Spain. So when she wanted to do these exams, it just seemed a logical route to pursue. And I think what's been really interesting for me is to compare a purpose-built online school environment with the frankly disastrous lash-up that she endured 2 years ago when the whole world had to go remote overnight. And I think, although it's not perfect, the interface, I think we've all been pleasantly surprised and relieved to see what you can do with an intentional design around online learning. And my daughter's 17, but this particular school does from primary onwards, because they're specifically targeting expats and sort of diplomatic families. And also they get in the UK, they get students who are funded by the local authority for reasons of sort of mental or physical health and things like that, people who just can't be in a classroom environment as it typically stands. So it's an interesting mixture. And I think they've done a good job with the platform that they've built.
And do you, before we go into what the environment looks like, as much insight as you can give us as possible, but do you know how long they've been around, and do you know whether they've changed a lot since the pandemic?
I don't know. I know they've had a lot of growth because
Mm.
there's a lot of chat amongst the parents about the size of some of the classes. They've got this kind of two-class system where one is more like a lecture sort of taught bit of the course, and another bit is more discursive and tutorial based. And certainly the lecture classes, there can be like 80 or 100 people logged on to that because it's not interactive. And that's quite hard. And I don't know how that works with the younger age groups. I would imagine engagement might be quite hard to foster. Whereas with the tutorial groups, there are about 20, and that works fine. There's a lot more interactivity and involvement. So yeah, they're figuring it out. And I know that a lot of the parents are saying that the numbers are up significantly, but obviously we've not been around it that long to know what it was like before.
Yeah, I imagine with lots of parents having experienced online work and online environments, which they hadn't 3 years ago, that might have gone, actually, okay, I can see now how this could work. So I can see
Yes,
why it's grown.
absolutely. And I can see that why we want to go and live somewhere else or have a more mobile lifestyle as a family.
Yeah.
And now we can take school with us as well as the work. So, it's obviously very appealing.
Yeah. So how does it work? Is there like a timetable? And also, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it will be different for all kinds of children, but your involvement as a parent is also interesting.
Yeah, it works. They've tried to replicate the kind of school experience as much as they can online. And again, our involvement's a little bit peripheral because we're just dealing with a couple of retakes here rather than a complete curriculum. And they do have that flexibility where you can opt into a sort of part-time package, and the fees reflect that as well. Whereas for the full-time schooling, they have assemblies, and they have sort of pastoral meetings in the classroom. They have assessment checks where you can see how you're doing. And they do have extracurricular things as well. Now, I mean, we've talked before about how this is with work and how it was in the pandemic, and people just don't want to go into another video conference when they're done for the day to cook pasta together or whatever. And so I don't know how well that works, but I think there's quite a diverse range of different things people can get involved with, and they have sort of summer schools and places people can get involved face to face in different locations. And it looks like a very sincere effort to try and make education work. If you want to have that location independence, but you don't want to be responsible for homeschooling in terms of the curriculum design and teaching yourself, I think it's a really good option. And of course, just like in the pandemic, parents do have to have differing levels of involvement depending on the age and the motivation of the student involved. I'm dealing with a 17-year-old. If she doesn't do the work, there's not a lot I can do about it. But if it was a primary school child, I know a lot of people found it incredibly difficult to do their work in 2020 whilst they were trying to sit next to a child looking at a Zoom of their teacher. Obviously, this is designed to be a bit more interactive than that, and they've done a good job. But there's still that sense of detachment you get through a screen, which is why we're trying to now build a supplementary curriculum of face-to-face tutoring and activities and things that actually mean leaving the house occasionally and those other things which are quite important for life in general. So I think that's the bit where we feel we've got to be responsible and weigh in.
That's interesting because it's something I hadn't thought of until you mentioned that, is that actually leaving the house is very important. And when you are going to school, you are leaving the house, you are moving, you are experiencing other bodies around you.
Yeah, and we wanted to keep those social things going, obviously, with the friends that she made in the face-to-face school, because she's not going to make any local friends through this online school. So it's all taking a bit of planning, but it's also trying to involve her in that planning as well, and learning how to manage your remote life and your own schedule, which is maybe less of a life lesson than you're going to get in school, where everything's worked out for you.
And so I have lots of questions. And do you think, I mean, I know that it's only she's doing a part-time, but do you think that they have more time during which they have to study autonomously than they would in a school? As in, do you think the ratio? Yeah, sorry.
I suppose that's really difficult to answer, because trying to look at the number of taught hours per subject and scale that up. I know that they have homework Because again, this is a thing that the full-time parents are talking about quite a lot on the Inevitable WhatsApp group, that they do sometimes seem to have quite a lot expected of them in terms of to complete outside the classroom. And the full timetable goes up to 4:00 UK time, which is 5:00 European time. So, I think, and this is year 11, it's GCSE year, so it's probably not such a big load lower down the school and when they haven't got public exams looming. But yeah, I think they do have to complete quite a bit on their own, and that gets graded. And there's a parent portal where you can see the marks and you can see attendance or any disciplinary or absence issues. So even if you weren't sitting there next to them, you can actually log in and see all that on the parent account.
And one thing that, you've already mentioned how much flexibility this gives to parents. And because one thing I was thinking, I went to an international school in Madrid, and there were people who were there for a couple of years and they moved countries. We've got, people who are in the military, whatever, for whatever reason, well, I would say disruptive. Sometimes people say it's a great thing for kids to be moving all over the world. So, this is, of course, there's never one way in which it affects us. But this is a nice way for a family that has to move physically for work, for either parent or both, to have this as a constant. This is like a constant.
Yeah, I think it obviously so much depends on the personality of the child. And some of them I know really thrive in that expat moving around kind of lifestyle, and new school, and make new friends and build a new network. And for other people, that's the worst nightmare, and that's a really negative price of having that kind of third culture kid upbringing. So it's great that alternatives exist now, which didn't before.
And do you think, and this is of course looking into the future, so one thing that I am hearing and seeing is that we still have, even we're looking at knowledge work, even in a technology-dominated workplace, young people are still struggling to come in, just like they always have, because it's a different environment and a different way of using technology in the workplace than with your friends. Do you think this starts to prepare children, and especially the older ones, to use technology in quite a structured way, in a collaborative way, rather than just the ad hoc where we're using it for connecting and social? Or is it too early to tell? I don't know.
I think it's too early to tell because this is such a niche thing at the moment. But I think just as we had the pandemic forced a lot of people to think for the first time, well, actually, I could do my job somewhere else other than sitting in the office, and I can use technology to replicate certain kinds of interaction. And why would I do that? What does that unlock for me personally? Then I think the fact that these choices are now rippling down to a generation that's not even in the workforce yet, it's going to have implications first for higher education, I think, because there's going to be a huge amount of people questioning, particularly with the current and upcoming economic crunch, of do I really want to go and get tens of thousands of pounds, euros, dollars into debt to get a degree on a campus where, if I'm used to studying online, can I do something more flexible and remote, just like my eldest is doing? And then that generation will then move into the workforce at the executive graduate level, and they'll be bringing that knowledge of how to collaborate, that mindset of how to do so online, and those expectations. Well, I want to live where I want to live. And so I think it's going to be very interesting times, and we just don't know what's going to unfold over the next few years.
And you could have children who struggle in what we've come to see as a normal school environment. Some people, like always, could thrive within this. This would be a nightmare for a lot, but some actually might discover that they do like this studying environment. It's just they didn't like school as we've known it.
Yes. Well, I've spoken to a lot of parents whose children thrived in lockdown. And because of the way that their minds and their personalities work, they did a hell of a lot better sitting at home with a laptop. And they weren't necessarily children with particular social problems or, anything that was wrong with their mental health. They just learned better that way. And most of us have no opportunity to find that out at that age.
That's the thing.
So, they're going to want to carry on like that. They're going to look actively for ways to do that. And think for some people going back to the classroom was wonderful and being able to be with their friends and hang out and do stuff. And the same, some people felt like that about going back to an office, whereas for others, it would always be a worst nightmare. So the more experience people have of different ways of doing things, the more they can become self-aware of what works for them and what their preference is.
Yeah. So does that mean, and this takes us to the next bit of the what's going on, which I find fascinating. So does that mean that if more people, this won't be like a super revolution, but if more people start slowly to take up remote work, does that mean that population in certain places is going to increase? Yes, this is great. So the article, Maya, that you found is called "Is Remote Work Behind the Spike in U.S. Birth Rates?" It's from June 2022, Institute for Family Studies, U.S. And by the way, listeners, I forgot to timestamp this. We're recording on the 15th of November 2022. This is an interesting one. As you brought it in, I've got some comments, but I'll let you, Maya, tell us, what is this article about?
Well, it's an article looking at some demographic data and asking what was everybody actually doing during lockdown? Didn't you people have Netflix? Because there is a discernible demographic spike in US birth rates, and that might be replicated elsewhere. And obviously, it's a correlation. Was it to do with working from home? Not sure about that, but was it to do with how people felt about being in a global health crisis? There are so many things that might contribute to this. And it's interesting because I've seen other data that said that there's actually been a wave of separations and divorces that it was maybe as a backlash to having had to spend so much time together. And in other households, it's brought new closeness and new investment in the future by means of procreating another generation. So really interesting. But these are the kind of, I suppose we're looking at all of these big picture stuff. These are the second, third order consequences that are really hard to predict and what impact they're going to have on society. So yes, quite fascinating.
And these numbers, they're still probably not in what was a stable time. So it says COVID is well known to have led to a major crash in birth rates in late 2020 and early 2021. But it's the birth rates rising again in late 2021 that the article is looking at. And I find that fascinating. It also does, for me, link back to our episode, What's Going On is Remote Work, Increasing Inequality, or something like this it was, which is that, of course, this is talking about remote jobs, which are disproportionately likely to be the kinds of jobs held by highly educated people. So, but at the same time, it's like you say, it's all linked, because it's, if I have more control over where I live, the kind of environment that I settle in, the kind of environment my children can grow in, does that mean I'm more likely to have children?
Yes.
And the other thing is, if you do find that by working remotely, you can have a less stressful life, again, that affects everything, not just people physically, but also how much they want to have a family. So it's really interesting how it's linked, and I never thought of that link before.
No, I mean, right, you would never predict this, would you? And yeah, I think it's fascinating. But again, it's showing people there are choices. People who are maybe thinking, I'm never going to have kids, or I'm going to put my career first, and it's a case of either or because I'd never be able to manage. And then you figure out that actually we're home anyway, and maybe we're both at home, and there's ways to divide things up in a less conventional way without somebody having to sacrifice their career. And so it's opened up that. And I'm sure, I believe that, and I can't quote anything, but I think there are typical demographics to show that whenever there's something like a pandemic, that there's a birth spurt afterwards. There's a kind of sense of a sort of collective desire to repopulate the planet. That tends to lead to a bit of a baby boom as we come out of these things, to almost replace the missing people. So it's probably part of that. And I don't know, maybe it's the most hopeful, optimistic thing anyone could do these days, actually, is to create a new human. But it'd be interesting to see, kind of track this generation, corona babies, quarantinis, as they move on through life, and see what's special about them.
Yeah, I find also I think they said some people don't get married because they live and work far from the person they want to marry. Remote work can help solve that issue. And I feel so, even though I don't have children, but that was the case for me.
Yeah.
So that again, but I mean, I think you're right that it's still early days, but it's so interesting.
Yes. Yes, and just that, you were a pioneer. So, okay, I'm going to change countries to be with the person I want to be with. And if it's just a case of you both staying at home in the same suburbs, that's a start.
Yes, definitely. However, they do quote a study that I found very interesting, and I can't follow the link right now for some reason, so I'm not sure of the time, but I think it was like a 2017 article. It was definitely before the pandemic, and it was a German study. And the title is, Does Broadband Internet Affect Fertility? And that's what they found.
Is this causation or correlation? Because it sounds like a lot of the kind of stuff that was spouted about 5G masts and COVID.
Well, they said we find, it's not about people being more fertile, it's probably about having children. So I'll just give it a quick read. So the spread of high-speed internet epitomizes the digital revolution, affecting several aspects of our life. Using German panel data, we test whether the availability of broadband internet availability influences fertility choices, so not fertility choices in a low fertility setting, which is well known for the difficulty to combine work and family life. So already we're narrowing the kind of data. We explored a strategy devised by Falk et al. To obtain causal estimates of the impact of broadband on fertility. We find positive effects of high-speed internet availability on the fertility of high-educated women aged 25 and above. Effects are not statistically significant both for men, low-educated women, and under 25. So we'll leave a link to the show notes.
So interesting.
So interesting.
It's all about choice that it unlocks when you can live and work from anywhere. You have a choice about what you do with the rest of your life as well, which people simply didn't have when they were commuting for hours to a distant workplace. So I'm sure it's one of those things when you look at the findings, you almost sort of say, well, yeah, obviously, that's so predictable. And yet nobody was predicting it the other way around in the same way. So absolutely fascinating.
I think as organizations are already seeing this, and as a society, now that we have found a level of making choice available to quite a wide strata of society, that we need to start finding other ways of giving some choice to the others. Because if not, this divide, I mean, they mention here, they say, our findings are consistent with the hypothesis that high-speed internet allows high-educated women to conciliate career and motherhood, which may promote fertility with a digital divide. At the same time, higher access to information on the risks and costs of early pregnancy and childbearing may explain the negative effects on younger adults. So
definitely. And this is the demographic where reproduction has been in decline as well. I think for a lot of people will see this as a very good thing, that it's actually encouraging people to reproduce who can afford it. And I do think this is a really interesting thing to see unfolding. And again, we won't see the full effects until some way down the line, but the more choice people have, is choice about how to balance their lives as well, and how to use there was a lot of talk a few years ago about people freezing their eggs during their most fertile years because they just couldn't afford to leave the workplace and go and reproduce. Whereas, if this means that somebody can take more flexible maternal or parental leave, and actually, whilst they're young and fit enough to do the parenting, because I have a 5-year age gap between my two, and honestly, it made a difference in terms of energy and my own health. And I'm very glad it wasn't dictated by my career, that nothing came along and said to me, oh, well, you can't afford to have children until you're in your 40s or whatever. That would have been absolutely exhausting. So it's great. And it's got to make for a better quality of family life too.
Great. So lots of unexpected stuff. So thank you for bringing those those up, Maya, because I think another wonderful outcome of the podcast. Let's have a quick look at some tech developments. Maya, have you seen this, that Zoom has got a kind of a co-working space
Zoom are
thingy
doing
going
everything
on?
now. It used to be a video calling platform, but now it wants to be your entire office and communication suite. So
Yeah. It's
cool.
really interesting. I got an email from somebody who was writing an article. I still haven't quite figured out if it was a sponsored article about whether virtual offices are really great for employee engagement and stuff like that. And I couldn't really comment because most of the organizations I'm in touch with have the Microsoft environment. And also I find that people don't, in a way, they don't need the virtual offices, which are places where you have the map of the office and you see where everyone is, because they've got other ways of sensing if people are around.
Yeah, it was such an interesting thing a couple of years ago. There were a lot of them, weren't there? I suppose it was that, again, it was that pandemic thing that everybody who could come up with anything virtual connected with work got funded. And yeah, it would be one more thing to have to log into and go to and do. And I think a lot of places that people who were just used to working remotely didn't necessarily feel a big need for.
And then he told me, well, look, Zoom's just released this, so they must be onto something. And I'm thinking, well, I remember also having a conversation with someone from Zoom when it was just the video thing and saying, well, we're going to have that. You can send messages to each other. Stuff. I thought, we've got Slack for that. Zoom is great as it is.
Yes, and kind of don't mess with it. And also, it's also so easy now to integrate these applications with each other. There's so many no-code solutions for just being able to pop your Zoom room open from Slack or wherever, that it's kind of, does that mean that Zoom needs to build their own Slack and vice versa? It's kind of easy to just put together the system that you want. But I suppose, again, just depends on the organization. And the more differentiation there is within the marketplace, the more likely people are to come up with the mix that works for them and being able to replicate it. And a lot of this stuff that they introduced at Zoomtopia, this extended functionality, I look at that and I think none of the clients I work with would ever use this. But that doesn't mean anything, because there are I can't remember the last time I used a whiteboard in a meeting, in a virtual meeting. But some people do. So it's great that Zoom now has a whiteboard. You can just pop it open and, it's so easy. So yeah, if they're offering all of these things, as long as they're not bundling it into the standard pricing.
Well, yeah, that's, I think that they all competing with Microsoft Office.
Yes.
And so I went on Hangout, what used to be Hangouts, Google Meet now yesterday, and found, unfortunately, that because I have probably the cheapest business plan, I can't record. Just like going back to Zoom, but I can use a Miro whiteboard during the session without without having a Miro account.
Right.
I can't export it as a PDF. So again, I think what we're seeing is just the larger platforms growing into an ecosystem platform rather than, and also the other thing, I don't know, I think maybe I was on Canva the other day and I saw the biggest announcements from Canva Create 2022. Docs, websites, whiteboards, video editing. Again, same thing.
Yep, let's all eat each other's lunch. And it's good that there is choice, because it just makes that choice so abstract and strategic now that somebody in a big enterprise at the very highest level of IT and comms has got to say, right, we are a Microsoft workspace, or we are a Zoom office, and we're going to just build everything around that. And it's going to be quite hard for people to switch. So I do understand why this is the latest gold rush, to try and be the hub, be the place that people go to work.
Listeners, we haven't asked for your opinion for a while. Obviously, the easiest when we come to tech. But yes, do tell us about anything that you were thinking about during the online school conversation, the remote work, and this effect that it's having, that it could have on fertility and repopulation. Anything that we'd love to hear from you. virtualnotdistant.com, or you can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. One other bit of tech in so I was preparing a webinar and talking about how technology has influenced, how the digitalization and technology is influencing the world of work. And I thought, maybe I'll have a look at DALL-E, the image generation software, which is now open. And I started to play, and what a rabbit hole, Maya, and generate this. So listeners, if you don't know how this works, you stick a few words in the search bar of this platform, and then it creates an image. It's a unique image. You can do it in the style of Dali, in the style of Degas, which is so wonderful. And wow,
it's my favorite way to waste time now. I think is to just go in there, and it's more or less free. I mean, they give you thousands of credits to use because it does variations of everything you suggest, and it's really good fun for social media posts. And I actually really like it in the kind of remote work and digital nomad space, because our stock photography is so rubbish and generic.
yes,
It's great fun to go in there and say, right, I want a picture of a digital nomad working in Spain in the style of Sorolla.
yes,
and
yeah,
you end up these glorious watercolors and
yes.
oil paintings, and it's not perfect. The hands come out really weird, but it's just so interesting and unique. And just by changing one word, you can tweak it and make it do something else really random. So yeah, it's great fun.
It's really great. And I was listening to a podcast, Writers Inc. They were talking about how the fact that, of course, these images have been generated by inputting lots of copyrighted material. And so, but then someone else was saying, well, that's how we learn, because when we are young and all through our lives, we are exposed to all these things that are copyright material. And then that we absorb that and out comes something else. So I hadn't thought of that. That is actually quite a human way of the machine learning.
Yeah.
And actually going, well, the copyright thing, well, that's all right. That's what we all do anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I feel for people who make a living doing this kind of abstract art, because it's bound to eat into their business in the same way that I have to keep one eye on what's happening with AI writing generation, GPT-3 and things like that. But I think you're absolutely right. There's always been this tension between what is plagiarism versus what is influence versus what is a tribute. We've had it, in music sampling and people being part of movements and being influenced by each other. And this is kind of the next level of that. But I suppose things like copyright law or even convention just hasn't caught up with the tech as usual.
Yeah. And I don't know if you got it, but through having an account with Dali, I think got an email a couple of days ago saying that basically now your images are yours. You have now the copyright of that image that you have created by. And I think maybe someone else was saying we might become masters at what to put in the search bar to get exactly what we want.
Yeah, well, it's that kind of how to write a good brief. Whether you're, I mean, I find that hard enough if I'm hiring somebody to do something visual. Now, obviously, you're recruiting the AI to do it. At least they're infinitely patient when you say, "Oh no, I didn't mean that."
Yes,
and you can have as many revisions as you buy credits for instead of really annoying an artist.
It makes our lives easier. Excellent. Good. Well, that's all unless you have any other tech updates, Maya.
No, I think those are the main things that seem to be going on right now. So I'm trying to keep my eye on the writing side of it as well. But it's the visual side of AI has been really interesting the last few months.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's have we've got a couple of things around community. So let's move on to those. Right. Well, the first thing I want to do is say hello to listener Scarlett, because we got a message from her this morning through virtualnotdistant.com contact form with a suggestion for an episode and some questions. And I still need to read the message properly, but I just wanted to say hello, Scarlett. Thank you very much.
Hello, Scarlett.
Yeah, it's so nice. And listeners, again, if there's something that you would like us to cover on the show or any comments, any questions, whatever, it's just really great to hear that we have a great time having this conversation. But if it's going somewhere else, then that's great. And also, Maya, you managed to read this, and I don't know if you remember, but I've gone back to the link and I can't get through. But Catherine Nicholson, who has been one of our guests and I know listens to the show every now and then, just the day after we recorded that stuff around the metaverse and how she posted something that she'd been on a meeting in virtual reality, and I mean she just loves it. So I can't. Do you remember? Because I haven't been able to access the post.
I can't open it either now, so I don't know if she's changed it or moved it. But I did remember thinking it was really interesting to see somebody actually using this for real, not in an experimental way, but they figured out it's a good place to do it and do this kind of face-to-face interaction. And also she had some interesting feedback just on the physical experience. And I think that the next generation of VR headsets and things it is becoming easier to wear for at least the duration of a meeting without feeling really uncomfortable or nauseated, and a lot of the problems that the earlier ones had. So that proves that the hardware is catching up, and we can expect that to kind of go away as a thing within a couple of years. Maybe we'll just have an application in our glasses or whatever that we won't need a headset. So yeah, it's great to see the stuff being actually used.
Yeah. So listeners, if you are on LinkedIn, Catherine Nicholson with a C for Catherine, and she loves the Microsoft environment. I have to say, if you want to follow someone who's always finding out the new things they're doing and using, she's someone to follow. Another of our current, our contacts and guests is Judy Rees, who has a course on Maven, which is a platform for cohort-based courses. And the workshop, it's a course, Buzzing Online Workshops for Change Makers. So it starts on the 5th of December, 2022. And if you want to attend the course, you can have 20% off by putting the word Pilar in the voucher code thing, and that is PILAR. She gave it to me as full uppercase, so maybe try that. And I think I'm attending. It should be I'm sure it'll be fun
for a workshop.
Yeah, especially the Buzzing Online Workshops for Change Makers. I think that's really intriguing. Yeah.
That's a great prompt for an AI headline generator. It's got all the right words in there that just, you've got that picture in your mind, what it's going to be like.
Yeah. And I've just seen your note, Maya. So we'll go very quickly via another one from Richard McKinnon, who has now an online community all about personal development and around the area of psychology in the workplace. So if you want to find out more about that, you can go to worklifepsych.club, and we'll stick all these links in the show notes. But so Maya, I haven't heard about this. Tell us.
I haven't heard much about it either. This is a very last minute thing, which I'm really looking forward to reporting back on a future episode, because in December I'm going to, I think it's inland Istria in Croatia, which is a really rural, underdeveloped area that wants to look at possibilities for attracting remote workers and digital nomads to develop their out of season tourism in the future. So it should be a really interesting few days of workshops and seeing what the area's got to offer, and really trying to contribute to building a strategy and helping local businesses do what they've got to do to make this work and hopefully let this area have a new stream of income. And it all ties into everything we were talking about before, really, that giving people choices and where to live and how to live, and the opportunity to either visit or even relocate to somewhere which looks absolutely beautiful. There will be photos. There's going to be lots of hiking and exploring the local area. It looks very foresty and mountainy. It's going to be freezing. But apart from that, I'm really looking forward to it.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to you reporting back. That sounds really, really amazing. So listeners, you can look for Maya Middlemiss everywhere online, connect with her so that you can follow what she's going to be doing in Croatia. You can follow us on virtualnotdistant.com. If you are listening to this show on a website, then make sure you go to a podcast app, any podcast application, and look for us and subscribe so you won't miss a show. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter, which has reading and listening recommendations over at virtualnotdistant.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn on our page, although to be honest, we're not that active. All the same with the Twitter account, Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. However, if you email through pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, you will surely get an answer. Do you want to say a quick goodbye to our listeners, Maya?
Absolutely. And we'll see you again soon, because there's always lots going on.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.